welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We're going to unravel one of its most enduring and really influential factions, the Ultramarines. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources for you, deep lore excerpts, strategic analyses, basically everything to give you a shortcut, a real understanding of why these blue-armored warriors aren't just another chapter, why they're often seen as the blueprint.
Yeah, the absolute blueprint. Our mission today is really to unpack that foundational role, their strategy, their doctrine, which, shapes so much of the Imperium, and also their relationships, which can be pretty complex within that huge galaxy. By the end of this, you won't just know who they are, you'll get why they matter, why they're so central to 40K.
Okay, let's get into it then. When we talk about the Ultramarines, that idea of them being the standard, what does that actually mean? What's at their core?
Well, you have to start with their origin, right? They were the 3rd Legion Astartes, one of the original 20 legions from the Great Crusade era. And yeah, it's true, the sources consistently call them perhaps the most emblematic, the very paradigm of what it means to be a Space Marine. They really are the benchmark.
And that lineage, that all goes back to their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, Homeworld, Macragge. But what about their actual character? The sources paint this picture. Unflinchingly loyal, civilized, refined, but also uncompromising in war. It feels like a real balancing act. Nobility, strategy, versatility. They seem to aim for the peak in everything.
You really do. And that extends beyond just fighting. They're known for this incredibly balanced approach to warfare, sure, but also governance. I mean, they carved out this whole pocket empire, Ultramar, around Macragge, a stable, disciplined area, which is pretty rare. And what's really key here, especially now, is their Primarch, Guilliman. Critically wounded after the Horus Heresy, stuck in stasis for millennia, like 10,000 years.
Just asleep.
Yeah, basically. And his resurrection, relatively recently in the timeline, that's kicked off a whole new era. For the Ultramarines, obviously, but for the entire Imperium, too. He's back, and he's making changes.
Right. And here's a nuance I find interesting, something you should note about belief in the Imperium. Unlike some other chapters, the Ultramarines, they don't explicitly worship the Emperor as a god, do they?
No, not in their core doctrine. They revere him hugely. As an honored ancestor, the ultimate general, the founder, but not divinity itself.
Which puts them in contrast with chapters like, say, the Black Templars, who are very much about the Emperor's divinity.
Exactly. It shows you that spectrum, even among the loyalists. Different philosophies under the same banner.
Okay, so talking about Guilliman making changes.
Right.
If there's one thing tied to the Ultramarines, it's the Codex Astartes. This is way more than just a field manual, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Far, far more. It's a cornerstone of their whole legacy. Their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, he wrote it. And this massive book, it quickly became, well, almost sacred text for most chapters. It dictated organization, tactics, recruitment, everything. It fundamentally reshaped the Astartes post-heresy.
So why? What was the driving force behind it? Why was it so critical right after that huge civil war?
It was a direct reaction to the Horus Heresy, a catastrophic failure of the old system. The Codex demanded breaking up those massive legions, some were hundreds of thousands strong, into smaller chapters, limited to about 1,000 battle brothers each. The idea was purely to prevent any one commander, any one legion from having the power to threaten the Imperium like Horus did. It was about decentralizing military power. But, that raises the question, was it immediately popular?
No, definitely not universally. I mean, you had other Primarchs, powerful figures like Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fists, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves.
Yeah.
They pushed back, didn't they?
They did. They saw it as breaking tradition, weakening their strength. Dorn, especially, was known for his stubbornness. He saw dismantling his legion as a betrayal.
So how did Guilliman win them over? Or did he?
Well, history tells us Dorn eventually came around. The turning point seems to be when Guilliman's Ultramarines actually helped Dorn out during a complex plot by the traitor Primarch Perturabo. That practical demonstration of the Codex principles, that active support, it kind of cemented Guilliman's position. It put the Ultramarines and the Codex right at the center of that massive post-heresy reform. It was strategy and pragmatism winning out.
Okay, so Guilliman's vision shapes the future of the Space Marines. But how did the other big players, the other chapters with their own histories and cultures, how did they fit into this new order? And how have those relationships changed over 10,000 years? They weren't operating in isolation.
No, not at all. They're deeply woven into the fabric of the Imperium. Take the Death Watch, for example. The Ultramarines, like many Loyalist chapters, contribute veteran Marines to the Death Watch. That's the specialized group focused entirely on fighting Xenos, aliens.
So you get Ultramarines, with their Codex discipline, serving side by side with, say, Space Wolves or Blood Angels.
Exactly. Pooling their different skills against alien threats. We even know specific names, like watch Captain Uriel Ventress, who's known for being a bit unorthodox for an Ultramarine and a chaplain who did multiple tours. It shows their commitment to that broader Imperial cause.
And we touched on the Imperial Fist connection through the Codex adoption. What about the Space Wolves? They always seem a bit wilder, more independent.
They definitely are. The sources mention that even back during the Heresy, a Space Wolves monitoring group sent to watch the Ultramarines. While the relationship was described as bitter cooperation.
Huh. I can just imagine that.
Yeah, clash of cultures, right? Disciplined Ultramarines meet the more feral wolves. But despite that tension, things evolved. Space Wolves actually fought alongside them later in the Ultramar campaign, defending their home system. And they answered Guilliman's call when he returned for the Terran Crusade.
So grudging respect turned into a necessary alliance.
Pretty much. Driven by the sheer threats the Imperium faces. Guilliman's return seems to have helped smooth over some of those ancient rivalries, maybe.
And then you have the Black Templars, successors of the Imperial Fists, but famous for ignoring parts of the Codex, especially the chapter size limit, and their intense faith.
Yeah, they're a fascinating case study in compliance. Or non-compliance. High Marshal Helbrecht, their leader, he accepted Primaris Marines. That's significant. It shows a practical link to Guilliman's big project, even if they interpret doctrine differently.
Right.
And interestingly, one of their marshals, Marius Ummelrich, actually worked with the Ultramarines chapter master, Calgar, to help bring Guilliman back.
So there's cooperation despite the differences.
Definitely. But their famous disregard for the 1,000 Marine limit, it kind of ironically highlights the Ultramarines' role in setting that standard in the first place. It shows the tension in the Imperium, the ideal of the Codex versus the reality of powerful independent chapters doing their own thing.
That's a really good point. The Templars get away with it because they're so effective, right? Their crusades deliver results.
Exactly. Pragmatism often wins out in the Imperium. Their zeal and effectiveness against enemies often outweighs their, let's say, doctrinal flexibility. It's a constant balancing act for Imperial command.
Now, you mentioned the Primaris Marines. The Ultramarines seem intrinsically linked to their introduction. They're leading the charge with these new guys.
Absolutely. The Primaris are described as this new breed, faster, stronger, more stable genetically, just, better than the classic Space Marines in many ways. And Guilliman himself, on his return, was key to rolling them out. He founded whole new Primaris chapters, even for gene lines with historical issues, like the Space Wolves.
So he's basically upgrading the Astartes.
In a way, yes. The Ultramarines are the vanguard for this. It shows Guilliman is willing to shake things up, even disrupt millennia of tradition to strengthen the Imperium with these new warriors.
Okay, so for listeners who might also, dabble in the tabletop game Warhammer 40K,
Yeah.
how does all this lore translate? What do the Ultramarines like to play?
Well, on the tabletop, they really try to capture that lore. They're presented as this versatile, tactical force. Their rules often emphasize adaptability, strategic thinking, having an answer for different situations.
So if you're picking them up to play, what are their big strengths?
Yeah.
Maybe some things to watch out for.
Strengths. Definitely versatility, solid all-around units, tough elites, good leadership, access to lots of gear. But their main thing is often army-wide abilities. Tactical doctrines that let them adapt, re-rolling dice, getting bonuses in certain battlefield phases, that kind of thing.
So they can shift strategy mid-game.
To an extent, yeah, that's the idea. But the challenge is, well, their units can be a bit pricey in points cost, so you might get outnumbered by horde armies. And honestly, the sheer number of options can be overwhelming for new players. Plus, everyone knows the Ultramarines. Your opponent probably knows what they can do and how to fight them.
Ah, the curse of being the poster boys.
Kind of. And yeah, painting all that blue armor neatly, that takes patience.
I can imagine. Trying to get to that perfect blue, avoid the dreaded blueberry look. So generally, they're a solid pick if you like a balanced army, not hyper-specialized.
Precisely. Unlike, say, Blood Angels, who are all about close combat, or Dark Angels with their specific secrets in plasma, Ultramarines are usually found right in the main Space Marines Codex. It reflects their role as the standard. They don't usually get a separate book full of unique niche rules. They are the baseline. They aim for excellence across the board.
And just for fun, you might hear fans call them blueberries, right? Because of that iconic blue armor and how common they are.
Yep, that nickname definitely pops up.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here? From being the 13th Legion, Guilliman's boys, writing the literal book on being a Space Marine, They're clearly much more than just the blue guys. They're the tactical foundation, the architects of Space Marine structure. And now, with Guilliman back, they're leading the Imperium into whatever comes next.
Absolutely. And connecting that to the bigger picture, their whole story makes you think, doesn't it? In a universe facing constant existential threats, how vital is sticking to the rules to establish doctrine? And what's the role of figures like Guilliman? First, he sets the standard, creates the doctrine with the Codex. Then, 10,000 years later, he returns and starts adapting it, introducing Primaris Marines. It raises questions about when to stick to the plan and when you need visionary leadership to change it, something for you to mull over.
A really fascinating point. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Ultramarines. We really hope you feel much more clued in on this absolutely pivotal faction in 40K. If you enjoyed this deep dive, maybe share it with a friend, someone else who'd appreciate a shortcut to being well-informed. And consider subscribing to the deep dive for more facts and insights. Until next time.